Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of our Farming RPG tutorial series. So today we're going to figure out how to change scenes. So basically our player is gonna be able to go to town and enter his house. So first let's get the appropriate assets for it. I got here this polygon farm pack. So we're going to import it here. You can use any similar asset, it doesn't really matter. We're just using this pack by Cinti Studios just for this tutorial. Now that it's imported, let's move this to imported assets. Okay, let's set up the scene. So we're gonna have three scenes to work with. It's the farm, player's home, let's get it set up in a bit. As you can see, we've set up three scenes: the play home, town, and the farm. So our player should be able to enter and exit these three scenes. But the problem with switching between these three scenes is that if I were to switch, I'll lose all my data on the player's inventory and everything that is important. So we need to make these things persistent. So create a new game object, call it essentials. We'll bring in a manager game object, the directional light, the event system, the player, the main camera. So all these are essential. And then under our prefabs, we will make this a prefab. Let's create a new folder. We'll call this scene transition. And in scene transition, we'll create a new script. Let's call this scene transition manager. Open up scene transition manager. And we will make this a singleton class. Okay, so this is what we usually do, like with our other singleton class. But we want this. We will put scene transition manager up in essentials. And we want it to stay persistent. So we will do don't destroy unload this game object. So this will be persistent. So if I were to change scenes, this game object would not be destroyed. But then if I were to, for example, move to town and then come back here, then there would be 2 instances of this. So we want to prevent that. So instead of just destroying this instance, we should destroy the entire game object. We can now create a function that will switch our location. But how do we know what location we want to switch? Let's represent our 3 scenes with an enum. Take note of each of the names here. The enum should be the exact naming. Let's declare an enum. So they're the farm, the player home, and the town. So now when we want to switch location, we just have to take this as a parameter. Location to switch. Since our enum corresponds to the exact naming here, we just have to but we get an error here because we have not used Unity Engine Scene Management. So how do we get the player to switch location? So the player has to step outside the boundary. So if he enters through the door, it will switch locations. We'll need another class to do that. So let's create a new C# script, call it location entry point. And we'll keep track of what location it's going to switch to with a location variable. Create a new game object, we'll call this locations. And this game object will keep track of all our locations. Player has a step here, and he will be transported into the house. Set this to his trigger. And we'll add the location entry point, serialized field. So this location goes to the player's house. And then we need another location point here. So when the player walks by here, it goes to town. Now back to the location entry point script. Let's create an onTrigger enter. So on trigger enter, when the player enters, if the player steps on this, we call scene transition manager instance.switch location, and we'll bring in our own location. Now open your build settings. Make sure your scenes are in your build settings or it will not work. So start with farm, player house, and the town. Let's go to our player. We have not set its tag. Make sure the tag is set to player. Yep, we have switched scenes. We've switched it to the player's house. But we're not at our intended spot. You can see the player's coordinates is exactly the coordinates of it at its previous scene. And it's not at all at where we want it to go. So we need to figure out a way for Unity to teleport the player to where the player should be in. Like if I were to go to town as well, see, the player ends up not where he should be. We want the player to start here. Let's represent the start locations. So we'll create another location game object here. If the player is entering from his farm, we want him to be positioned here. This is about where the door is. And if you were to exit, you move it a bit down. Make sure the colliders are not touching, else the player would be teleported indefinitely. So it goes to the farm. How do we know that the player will move to this transform? So we need a new class to manage these location points, or this location manager. We'll make this a singleton class, so there should only be one location manager in a scene. And we have to keep track of transforms, so then we'll add location manager here. But you see, there can be multiple start points, like we see in the farm. The player could be coming from his house, or it could be coming from town. So how do we know what is what? We assign each transform a location. To do that, we need to create a new struct. Call this start point. In each start point, we want to keep track of the location it's entering from. And the transform. With that, we can, instead of transform, we declare a list of start points. Oh, don't forget, in start point, make sure it's system.serializable. So we are able to see it in the inspector. There. So, in the case of the player's house, we need there's one start point that is entering from the farm, and in the farm there are two start points. They're entering from the town, and one is entering from the player's house. So we create a new empty game object. So this is the transform of where the player is going to be in when he comes back from his house. When he exits his house, let's just group them nicely. So it's from and to points are here. They will never touch each other, it seems, which is good. So at the player start, and its home will be from player home, The town's from town. Now for location manager, we need location manager to communicate with scene transition manager. So when the player switch location, but we want him to also switch his starting point. We want to move the player to his position. With that, we will make use of a callback scene manager.scene loaded. We need a function for this. It should take in the following parameters. So first things first, we need to keep track of the player's current location so we know where the player is coming from. This location is where the player is coming from and the scene nodes. And the new location, since we named our location enum values exactly the same as our scene values, so to get the new location we just have to pass the values. Use enum.parse using system. It cannot convert, so we need to cast it first. So cast it to location, and then it will pass. You'll basically convert with that settled. We need the start point, and then we need to, and then now to find the start point. So under location manager, we need a new function. The class will tell scene manager where the player is supposed to be. So for example, if the player is coming from the farm, scene transition manager will tell location manager, the player is coming from the farm. Can I get the farm coordinates? And then location manager will be here. The player should be here right now. So that is what we're going to do. Get player starting position. We made this a list because list has this find function that lets us go through the array and find an entry that contains this location. So it's gonna find, so it has to find a match. Returns starting points start. So now find the start point back in scene transition manager. And then after we find it, we just have to set player's transform. So we need to get the player first. Declare a new variable, transform player point. Found like this, find object type, player controller, dot transform. So now we can just change the player position. Let's see if it works. So when the player comes in, oh no, get an error. Okay, we don't need to set the player location for for this one, because this is our starting scene. If the new location is the same as the current location, it should not throw an error when we do this. Okay. It doesn't work. This is because our character controller is messing with the transform value. So we need to disable the player's character controller first when we switch the scenes. The moment we set the player's position to a new position, the character controller component overwrites it. So before we do this, disable the character controller component. So we get the character controller and then we disable it. And after we change the position, then we re-enable. Let's try it out. Yep. So now the positions so we should also set the rotation as well. Where did our player end up? Okay, we forgot to set it for the town. Need a location manager. Player is coming from the farm. Right, and it goes to the farm. It comes from the farm. So the player enters from here. Start point should be somewhere here. Okay. And yep, we must start this one. Should be farm there. This one goes to farm. Yep, so everything is as they ought to be. Let's smooth out the experience a little bit more. So let's have the screen fade out before we switch to the new scene. So in our essentials, create to UI. Call this the fade out. Make things easier, call this a fade in. For this, we need to create an animation. Create a new folder here. This UI. And we'll call this animation fade out. So what fade out does is that it starts from 0 alpha. And we want this duration to be about 1/4 of a second. So when the screen fades out, likewise the fade in is the same thing, but it does the opposite. You just have to switch. But on fade in, once it's faded, we want it to... never mind. Let's create a new script. We'll call this animation event parent animation event, because the default animation event just sends message to the game object itself, but we need it to send message upwards. We'll create a new option. So we'll call send message upwards message. Now we just have to add this component to the both of them. So now in the animation, let's call this function notify ancestors. For fade in, it's on fade in complete. This will be our callback function for whatever happens when the fade in animation finishes. Likewise, we'll do this for fade out as well. Fade out. For these animations, make sure that loop time is disabled so that it does not loop. So when we enter the scene, we want it to fade in from black. And when it's done, it should disable. So let's go to UI Manager. Let's create some new functions. The event names. Let's fade out. Let's capitalize this. So after it fades in, we want it to be disabled. Let's see this in action. So UI Manager, this is fade out and this is fade in. Maybe you want to make the animation play a bit longer. Yep, likewise, play for half a second. So we fade out the screen here. We don't have anything we want to do when fade out is done. So we can move it here. Now with that, we can go to Scene Transition Manager. So before we want to load scene, we want to call a fade out. And we'll declare a new bool. So that way, if the UI manager fades out for any other reason, it will not trigger a change of scene. Never mind. So we call a fade out of the screen. And then we have a boolean called screen fade out. And then we'll call the onFadeOut out complete, which will be called and we'll use a coroutine. We'll check every 0.1 seconds before we load the scene. So screen fade it out, it stops, then we call the coroutine. And then we reset the. Let's see if this works. So now when I want to enter house, oh, that is because on screen fade out, when fade out complete, fade out needs to let's see. Oh, we have a function to reset fade in, fade false, fade in is true. So after we load the scene, going to reset. Okay, let's rename this reset fade defaults. Let's see if it works. Yep. That way our scene transitions are smoother now. But we should disable the player's character component while the scene is fading, because the player should not be able to move around when the scene is changing. Okay, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and we'll see you next time.